Latakia City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
Interesting person. He's the first person I've ever met who has a surname of Kirk. I think it's a Scottish surname, isn't it? I want to call him Captain Kirk, but Scandinavian, Ambassador Kirk. Kevin Kirk, he's had a fascinating history. Amongst other things, he was... were you in the diplomatic service when in Russia? Anyway, he was in the Soviet Union when it collapsed, so I'm hoping if he has a good time giving the talk today, he might come and talk about that. I think that would be a very fascinating conversation, learning about what it was like there and why it collapsed. He has some insights into that as well. So come on up, KK, and give us your perspective on, I should actually mention we're coming up to the 11th of the 11th, and I usually try to have somebody who's done service for their country to give a talk, but I couldn't seem to find anybody this year. So, well... Oh, well, why didn't you tell me? Could have given you... Anyway, respect to everybody who served their country, and thank you for your service. And KK here is going to give a talk on the truth is the first casualty of war. Yeah, in terms of the Ukraine and Russia. Thank you, KK.
Okay. You hear me okay? Let me set the timer going because I really don't want to go over. So, okay, a bit of background to myself. Okay, I worked in the Soviet Union. Okay. Okay. I worked in the Soviet Union. I didn't work in Moscow like in Peter Hitchens. I actually worked in factories in the Soviet Union, two cities, Tula and a place called Sovietsk in Kaliningrad. Hello? Oh, okay. I also, I was in the Soviet Union when it collapsed, so that was interesting times. Later on, I was involved pretty heavily in Ukraine. At the behest of the government, I actually was invited over by the government of Ukraine. It's a long story, but it was all in what they call military offsets. In Thailand, I worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was a trainer for diplomats. We did all sorts of things, set up scenarios where they had to sort themselves out of things diplomatically, etc., etc. I don't know if you know, but Thailand has got the DFA where I worked is the biggest, certainly the oldest, Institute of Foreign Affairs, diplomat training centre in Asia. It's one of the first in the world, actually. And it was based on the British Foreign Office, believe it or not. We train diplomats, we train senior management from all over the world. Africans, mainly Africans, Middle East, Asians. We did a lot of stuff in Asia, like, for example, Cambodian government. I taught all of Hun Sen's workers, all the people who work in his office, so I taught them. We looked at things, I mean, we did all sorts of scenarios, but on the English side, we looked at diplomatic English. For example, I'll just give you one small example. If a diplomat wants to say, they're in a treaty organisation, they're actually talking about a treaty, and a diplomat comes back and uses passive voice and says, it is being studied. And what that means is we're not interested. However, if they say, we are studying it, means we are interested, okay? I mean, that's just one small thing. If it goes from we to us to I means we're about to sign, okay? I'm not going to go on any more than that. Bottom line is with Russia and Ukraine, I worked in both places. I really like the people, especially Ukraine. I had a lot of dealings with Ukraine. I employed a lot of people from Ukraine in my business at the time. And I had very good connections with the University of Lviv, Polytechnic University of Lviv. I know a lot of Ukrainians. Oh, I say I know a lot of Ukrainians. Most of my Ukrainian friends have disappeared. I can't contact them anymore. So I don't know what's happened to them. Okay. Let me talk about this war, what's going on at the moment. Okay. Hope this works. Oh, there you go. You're probably wondering why I'm putting that up. The reason for putting that up is just about nothing we've been told about Ukraine is true. Not a damn thing, okay? Various reasons for that, and I'll go into them. But we have to bear that in mind. And let me tell you why. Incidentally, all my references and stuff are available. Either they're available as videos online like YouTube, or they're available as text, okay? And I could probably find all the URLs for you if you're really that interested. I also get a lot of stuff from diplomats. I met a lot of diplomats from all over the world. And if I really want to know what's going on, I'll contact them. I'll just ask them, okay? Not because I'm going to do an expose or something like that, because I'm not interested. I just want to know what's going on. It's for me personally, okay? I like to know the truth. And because I was employed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in a neutral country, I was trusted. I'm not going to blurt out their secrets, okay? Which I'm not. Most of them didn't give me secrets. I'm more interested in perceptions. What do they think of a particular situation? Okay. Our story really starts, let me see if this works. This is Ukraine, okay? Ukraine was never a unitary place, okay? It meant, Ukraine means in Russian, borderland, okay? That was the original Ukraine. Those were the Tartars. Yes, you've heard of the Cossacks and things like that. That was the original Ukraine in 1654, okay? The Russian Tsars gave them land because they wanted a border. The Russians are freaked out by security, okay? And they want a buffer zone between them and any enemies. And that was one of the reasons why they got the yellow thing, okay? The greeny blue one, okay? That's very important to our story, okay? That's Galicia, okay? The story behind Galicia is the Galicians are very, very independent people, okay? They really don't like anybody. They want to be their own country. I don't blame them. They've been pushed around. 100 years ago, Poland invaded Russia. And basically it was, the Russians were going through their civil war at the time. The Reds were fighting the Whites. And the Poles thought this is a really good time to invade Russia and take over the lot. Well, they stopped fighting amongst themselves, the Reds and the Whites, and they kicked Poland out. And basically, they took that land off Poland. Galicia was Poland, okay? They took that land off Poland. This thing about Stalin incorporated it, but the land was taken in the 1920s. Okay, the only other one that I wanted to mention, the purpley one, that's the Donbass, pretty much. It goes right round to Odessa on the left here, but mainly that's the Donbass. That's what Russia's going to end up with, okay? They got it from Lenin, and it was a what do you call it? Administrative thing. It was much easier to administer it locally than it was from Moscow. So consequently, they did it like that. Remember, Ukraine was part of Russia then, so it was just an administrative thing. Okay, let's move our story forward to 1954. 1954, Khrushchev was the General Secretary of the Communist Party in Russia, okay? Basically ran the Soviet Union. He was Ukrainian. He was the head of the Ukrainian Communist Party, okay? He got together with a bunch of his cronies in the Kremlin one night, all Ukrainians, and they gave Crimea to Ukraine. Now, constitutional experts in Russia said it was illegal because there was no quorum. There were members of the Duma, or whatever the Supreme Soviet, but there weren't enough of them. Therefore, the actual act of handing it over was illegal. Russians did nothing about it. Brezhnev came along and basically he said, well, Ukraine's part of Russia anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Everybody else came along. Gorbachev really had enough problems without dealing with that, so he left it. Yeltsin tried to do something about it, but all his Western friends turned around and said to him, oh, no, leave it as it is, leave it as it is, okay? By the time Putin came along, it was pretty much recognized that it was part of the Ukraine, okay? Even though legally it wasn't, but it was recognized as part of Ukraine. The big thing about the Crimea is that's the home of the Black Sea Fleet. Very, very important to Russia because it's the home of their warm water fleet, the only warm water port they've got. So what they did with Ukraine, when the Ukraine broke off from Russia, they leased it. I think it was a 40-year lease. There's something like that. I thought, well, there's 40 years left to run or something like that, okay? So they're leasing it. Okay, we'll come back to that story in a minute. Let's talk about some Nazis. Whoa, sorry. There you go. I told you Galicia was very, very independent, and they really didn't like anybody, okay? They didn't like people like the Jews, they didn't like anybody that had brown skin, they really didn't like anybody. So anyway, when the Germans came along, the German Nazis came along and marched into West Ukraine, the Galicians turned around and thought, well, hang on a second, these people don't like Jews, they don't like blacks, they don't really like anybody. They're our kind of people. We like these people. They're great. In fact, at the time, there was newsreels of them giving the traditional welcome, which is bread and salt, yeah? And, I mean, the Nazi newsreels made a big thing of it. Oh, look, Russia's so bad that the Russians are giving bread and salt to our soldiers when they come in, okay? But it wasn't. It was this particular group, okay? We still use it now. It's still a trope now, okay, this bread and salt thing, welcoming the Nazis. It was that particular group. Well, anyway, the Ukrainians really loved the Nazis, okay? Some of them joined the SS. In fact, quite a lot of them joined the SS. One particular group, the real psychos, joined the Dirlewanger Brigade. You can look them up on the internet. Dirlewanger himself is a real lovely guy. He was a paedophile and various other things, and a killer. And he was in the SS, but basically he kidnapped this 8-year-old girl, raped her, and then spit roasted her while she was alive, okay? And that was too much, even for the SS, okay? The SS were not really squeamish, but they were squeamish about that sort of thing. Himmler turned round, pulled him out of jail, and said, I'm going to create a brigade. And he created a brigade full of rapists and murderers and all that sort of thing, called the Dirlewanger Brigade. They were a pure terrorist organization. The idea was that they would go in, they would terrorize the town would call to the German authorities, please come and save us, and the German authorities would move in, and then if people ever said, what are you doing there, they can turn around and say, we were invited in. It appealed to the Nazi bureaucratic mind, okay, so that's how they work. Some of the ones, the dumber ones, ended up as concentration camp guards. They if you notice, all the concentration camp guards that have been convicted lately are all Ukrainians. The better ones were put into this lot. 14th Waffen SS, okay? The Galician, 1st Galician. Now, these people were very special. Do you know why? They were the assassins. They did the massacres, okay? If you wanted a massacre, these are the people you called in, okay? They had absolutely no scruples whatsoever. They were involved in all the big massacres, okay? Poland, Ukraine, Yugoslavia, Italy, okay? If you want 1,000 odd people shot, buried in the forest, these are the guys. These are the go-to guys, okay? After the war, they were labelled by the Nuremberg trials as war criminals. Pretty fine. You can look them up, by the way, on the internet. You'll see all this. You'll see all this. Okay. Let's leave them for a little bit. We'll come back to them, but let's leave them for a little bit. Let's go on to the next one. Let's come to the present day. Now, one of the things we've had in the British press is they've been talking about the Azov battalion, yeah? Azov this, Azov heroes, blah, 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 blah. What is Azov? Let's look at their sign. This particular sign has appeared on shoulder patches that's appeared in the Western press all the time. The blue and white and yellow one, that one. What's it made up of? It's made up of the Nazi Black Sun, okay? The Nazi Black Sun is part of the SS pagan rituals, okay? Because the place where they did their pagan rituals, which was a castle outside Paderborn, had that as a mosaic in the floor. Himmler liked it because it's got SS. It's the runes. He sees the runes. So that's the Nazi Black Sun. Next to it is the emblem in the SS. Das Reich Division, okay? That's incorporated into Azov Battalion's coat of arms, so their badge, as it were. So what did they get up to, these lovable little creatures in the Azov Battalion? These are just some of the atrocities they did. They were set up, they worked mainly out of Mariupol, okay? They had a big base in Mariupol. It's about 35,000 of them. Their favourite one is tying people to posts and then taking their bottom half of the clothes off so that they would be humiliated by flashing their genitals. But as the bottom one there shows you, they also did street beatings, okay? And they didn't stop there. I'm not going to show you all the stuff. That was a favourite. They'd kill women and then rape the corpse, okay? These are nice people, really. Let's have a look at these lovable rogues, shall we? Oh, there they are. That's your lovable rogues. Notice the sign there? Notice NATO and the Nazis. This particular image is a metaphor for the whole Ukraine war. We, in the West, are fighting on the side of the Nazis against the Russians. That's what we are. Those two signs, NATO and the Nazi flags, were on the battle tanks. Aren't you proud, British people? They were on our battle tanks. Challenger tanks were going out there with the Nazi flag flying. Isn't that great? Oh, by the way, this photograph came from the Daily Mail. Okay? Suddenly this photograph disappeared. It was only up for about an hour. Suddenly disappeared, and they got another photograph. Now, I'll tell you what I think about that. I think what actually happened is the sub-editor turned around and said to the guy who did the pictures, "What the hell are you doing? That's a Nazi flag on there." Okay? And he said, "What? The blue pointy one? That looks pretty sinister." He said, No, that's NATO. They're on our side. No, the other one. And the guy said, "Well, I think it looks pretty bold, personally. I like it." Well, anyway, the Daily Mail editor turned around to him and said, "Look, you have to put up another picture, okay? We can't have Nazi flags in the Daily Mail." And so they put up a picture of, you're not going to believe this, Tribune of the Colour. Now, the editor, the picture editor, probably turned around to them and said something. Those of you who are British probably know the Daily Mail. Probably said, "What shall I put up?" He said, "I'll put the Tribune of the Colour up. That's soldiery." And they said, "Well, hang on a second. Well, won't people be suspicious that the Queen's on there inspecting them?" And he said, look, son, this is a Daily Mail. Don't overestimate the intelligence of our readers, okay? They probably think that she's the queen of everybody, okay? Anyway, they took the picture down. One of the reasons was that the Daily Mail took the picture down is the Daily Mail loved Azov. I mean, like, really loved Azov, okay? Like this one. Now, this guy is the deputy... well, he was the military guy that started Azov. The other side, the civilian guy, is a guy that was installed by the Americans. But he's the military guy. He was stuck in Mariupol. know what they called him? An Azov hero. Okay, so they're Azov heroes, okay? 6 helicopter crews died rescuing that guy. 6 helicopter crews. They lost their helicopters, they lost the crews. For a hero from Azov. What about this one? 22 heroic Azov-style defenders. Now, this is a sham trial. So the Daily Mail says, this is from the Daily Mail, by the way, it's a sham trial. Well, of course it's a sham trial. One of the people that was on trial was the guy who murdered and raped the dead woman, okay? That was one of the guys, sham trial. Another guy killed 4 innocent people. They're in a car, they had a sticker on the side of the car, children on board, please don't shoot. He shot them anyway, he was bored. He shot 4 people. He's appeared in court, that's this lot, okay? Look at him, heroic. Heroic is not the adjective I would use to describe them. It really wasn't. Okay. Now, The Guardian and Sky News thought, we can't really have Nazis in our newspaper, especially The Guardian. My God, they come out in hives if they have a swastika in The Guardian. We had to choose somebody else who's not a Nazi, which is pretty tricky in Ukraine. So we chose the Georgians. They're fluffy. I mean, Stalin was a Georgian. He was all right. I mean, this is a Guardian, yeah? So they went to look at the Georgians. What they didn't realise about the Georgians is they're the biggest psychopaths in the world. I mean, this particular legion are vicious. Really, really vicious, okay? British mercenaries have come back from Ukraine and said, keep away from these guys. If there's new arms coming, these guys will come in and they'll take the best arms, and if you try to stop them, they'll shoot you. They tortured Russian prisoners of war. They shot their legs and elbows out, they blinded them, they cut off the genitals and stuffed them in the mouth, or they drove them across minefields. How do we know this? Because they filmed it and put it on the internet to taunt the Russians. Anyway, there is a happy ending to this. And that is a bunch of Russian volunteers got together and said, well, we're going to sort this out. So they went behind enemy lines and caught this lot. They killed most of them, and the rest they dragged off into captivity. And they will not be having a good time, okay, the Georgians. So there's a happy ending there. The Daily Mail shouldn't have bothered. Because in the Washington Post, suddenly, they're printing swastikas, okay? Facebook has turned round and reinstated Azov's recruitment, and it is recruitment, that's the narrow exception. Azov are recruiting on Facebook for Nazis to go and join them. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? Incidentally, I want you to see this guy here, okay, the gnome, I call him the gnome. He will appear again in a minute. The thing is, if you think about it, you've got to be a pretty depraved. These guys were trained by somebody. They were trained to use Western weapons. They were trained in things like waterboarding, torture techniques, and all that sort of stuff. They really terrorized Mariupol. Somebody taught them. And it had to be a government, because it had to be big. And they had to have access to Western arms, therefore they should be in NATO. But really, it's got to be a government that's got absolutely zero moral compass, okay? It's got to be a really, really evil government. A government that really just doesn't care and likes Nazis. Who could that be? Canada. Canada trained Azov, okay? First of all, the Canadian government, with Justin Castro, he was Fidel Castro's son, and his mother said so, and she should know. First of all, he said, no, we're not training them. Well, first of all, they said, we'll never train them. Then they said, we're not training them. And then they said, well, we were. But we didn't know they were Nazis. Oh, right, okay. Let me show you Exhibit B. Remember as I said, the Nomi guy? There he is. Anyway, a bunch of Nazis having an nice boisterous evening in, I don't know what Nazis do, sing the horse vessel or whatever, with 2 Canadian soldiers who said they didn't know they were Nazis. So all the swastikas and all that stuff, no Nazis here. No, it's true though. It's true. It's true, I can give you the evidence. Why? Why Canada? What's the connection with Canada? You remember our Galician division? After the war, they surrendered to the Allies. Originally, they were going to get sent to the UK, okay? But Churchill didn't want a bunch of Nazis running around the UK. Well, the UK is a pretty small place. So they sent them to Canada. Now, they are being called by the Azov their spiritual mentors, okay? Azov basically model themselves on these guys. Okay. They've worked their way into the politics of Canada, okay? Now, how do we know this? Well, I can give you just one example. Oh, there you go. Okay, so we got Zelensky there. This is Canadian Parliament, by the way. About 3 or 4 weeks ago. There's Zelensky there, Trudeau, Mrs. Zelensky. We'll come back to her in a minute. Behind is Christiana Freeland. Christiana Freeland is the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. And her grandfather was a member of the Waffen-SS. Okay? That's just one example. Now, they're giving a big standing ovation to somebody. Somebody. Who is the somebody? Him. This guy's called Hunker. He's a 98-year-old... well, let me tell you how he was described by the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament. He's a Canadian war hero who fought against the Russians in World War II. Notice everybody standing up, standing ovation. You know, there's one thing I never thought I'd see in my life, was all the great and the good of Canada standing in the middle of Canadian Parliament, giving a standing ovation to a mass murderer who's giving a Nazi salute. Ha! Afterwards, the Canadian Prime Minister was interviewed. And he was smirking. The Speaker was fired. Okay, he fell on his sword. Justin Trudeau wouldn't go. Not my fault. Knew nothing about it. He spent 3 hours talking to the guy about his war experience beforehand. As far as I'm concerned, this was an FU to the Canadian people. We did it because we could do it. Anyway, I think I've had enough of Nazis. Let's move on. Who started the war? Who started the war? Which person was it that actually set the whole war in motion? Her. This is Cathy Ashton. Cathy Ashton is a social worker from Luton. But also, she happened to be the first EU foreign minister. Okay? In about 2013, the government of the Ukraine went to Russia and said, we want an agricultural loan. Basically, we need to develop our agriculture. So the Russians turned around and they gave them I think it was 8 billion loan, yeah? It was a loan. George Soros, who ran the Kiev Post, plus he ran various other social media sites, he was heavily involved in Ukraine. He put it around that was a bribe. Why? Because this woman had offered Ukraine to join the EU. There was no way they were going to join the EU. They were corrupt as hell. Okay? But she offered. Now, joining the EU is a synonym for joining NATO. If you join the EU, you join NATO, pretty much. The Russians knew that. This silly woman didn't, okay? So immediately there was problems. The problems manifested themselves by a riot. This was a riot. This is Maidan Square, 2014. It started off as a student riot. It was ginned up by George Soros on the social media. These were students. They were doing the normal student thing. They were throwing stones at the police. Police were firing tear gas back. US called in the Nazis. Remember, the Nazis had been on the US payroll since the Second World War. OSS, forerunners of CIA, have been paying the Galicians off because they caused trouble for Russia. Okay? This is all historical knowledge. They called them in, okay, as part of this riot. The reason is they needed bloodshed in this riot for the plan to go ahead. And I'll tell you what the plan is in a minute. For the plan to go ahead, there had to be bloodshed. So what was happening is the Nazis were firing either from the crowd or over the crowd at the police, and the police were firing back. People were killed. About 37, I think it was. People were killed. About lunchtime, the next one. In the morning, this woman turned up on the scene. Now, if nobody knows who this woman is, this is Victoria Nuland. Victoria Nuland is descended from Ukrainians, okay? She's the Undersecretary of State. She is the ground person in the Ukraine war, okay? She's the one that actually runs the ground operation, as it were, in the Ukraine war. She's the one who planned the counteroffensive, etc. She's a nasty piece of work. She really is. I don't know what it is about some American females who get to high positions in US administration. They just seem to lose their humanity. I mean, I'll give you an example. Madeleine Albright. Look at that. I don't mind 500,000 people dying. It served our purposes. 500,000 children died. Served our purposes. It's perfectly fine. About lunchtime, on that particular day, the police pulled back. Yanukovych, the president, took control of the police, and he said that you're basically exacerbating the situation, let's pull you back. And they pulled them right back out of the Maidan Square. They're on the edge of the square, but they weren't actually in the square. What the West really needed, what the coup plotters really needed, was the police to be blamed for the death of students. They wanted 100. 100 was the magic number, okay? It had to be 100 to count as a proper massacre. Therefore, they could have, vote of no confidence against the president. Because the idea was the police shot at the protesters, and Yanukovych was in charge of the police, therefore he's not a fit person to run the Ukraine, blah, 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 let's get rid of him. Okay? Well, they got them. They got the 100. Okay, they call them, by the way, the Heavenly 100. Now, for years, this is Victoria Nuland, by the way, handing out cookies and cakes in Maidan with Jeffrey Piat, the guy behind her. He is the US ambassador to Ukraine, okay? Why were they handing them out? The story is they were keeping them on the square. Remember, by this time, the Nazis had pulled back, the police had pulled back. There was only students left on the square, a lot of them injured. So they're taking care of each other. They needed 100 people to die. Now, the story was there were snipers. The Kiev authorities denied it 100%. In fact, they put policemen on trial for it. They denied it 100% because if there were snipers, the whole thing would fall apart. The reason for the overthrowing of the president, the legitimate president, etc. Therefore, there could not be any snipers. But the problem was, this is what was happening with the snipers, by the way. Look, these are students holding up dustbin lids, trying to protect themselves against high-powered sniper rounds. Okay, oh, and that URL at the bottom, if you want to take a photograph of it, Newsnight were there that day. Newsnight, BBC Two Newsnight were actually there, and they saw the sniping. In fact, they videoed the actual hotel rooms. But everybody insists there were no snipers. It was the police. Estonian Foreign Minister turned around and he said, there were snipers. His spies told him. Dr. Ivan Kachanovsky, University of Ottawa, he analysed all the information, okay? He said the police were standing on the same level as the protesters, therefore the bullets couldn't have come from above, but they were coming from above. Anyway, the story stuck that it was the police that did it. Up until now. Enter these two charmers. These are two other snipers, the actual snipers, okay? Now, the deal they had was, they were Georgian. Well, they are Georgian. Their ex-president, who ended up in Ukrainian parliament, it's amazing, isn't it? Georgian president ended up in Ukrainian parliament. He brought them over to kill the protesters, okay? First of all, they were getting $1,000 for beating up politicians belonging to the ruling party. They had to be beaten enough to put them in hospitals so that they wouldn't vote in the vote of no confidence. And that's what happened. If you actually look, none of them turned up in Parliament. Now, these guys told the whole story, okay? I'm going to cut it short, but you can look them up, okay? And you can see it's verified. They were hired by the American Embassy, okay? Think about that for a moment. The American Embassy hired people to shoot protesters. The deal was they get $10,000 on signing, which they got from the American Embassy. They went to the American Embassy to get the money. They get $50,000 on completion. The first three of the snipers, there were 5 of them, first 3 of the snipers went to the embassy, disappeared, never saw them again. So these two thought, hang on a second, this is, well, I'm getting out of Dodge. So they left. But they provided, they went to Georgia and now they're in hiding in Armenia. They provided sworn testimony in front of a judge that they were the snipers, that everything they said was true, okay? Chapter and verse, I've put some of it there, okay? Notice the Americans are involved in the planning, okay? He's a spook, okay? Ex-military policeman, spook, okay? The Americans are involved in the planning. They got 100 people. Yanukovych fell, the Americans now took over. This is a phone call that Victoria Nuland had with Jeffrey Piat, who was the Ukrainian ambassador. Notice, this is on the BBC website. This was leaked by Edward Snowden, okay, part of the WikiLeaks thing. In here, the bottom bit, you can see how they're choosing the member of the new government. The new government was chosen by the American Embassy, okay? However, on the top part, look who's in charge. This is Biden's operation. Biden was running this, okay, from the White House at the time. Okay, you can look this up, by the way. The URL's there, if you can read it. You can go on there and you can read the conversation. This was the famous fuck the EU speech where the EU said they wanted to have a say in the government, and she said basically, fuck the EU, it's our show, okay? It's all there, it's in the transcript, and it's been confirmed that it's true. Okay, so at this particular point in time, they're taken over. The US is now running the Ukraine. They needed somebody to run it. They chose this guy. This guy's called Poroshenko. Now, something I want you to notice about Mr. Poroshenko. Notice his shoulder patch. He's a Nazi. He's a fully fledged Nazi. The Americans created a coup in Kiev and took over and put a Nazi in charge. Think about that for a moment. And they were. I mean, they're not very nice people. As soon as he got installed, okay, the first thing they did was to revoke the lease on the Crimea, okay? They wanted to kick the Russians out of the Black Sea. NATO already chose the building where they were going to have the HQ of the Black Sea NATO headquarters. The British were going to set up a base, HMS Azov, in the Kerch Straits. Basically, the British will be able to bottle up the Russian Navy completely. That was the prize, okay? That's what they were looking for. There were street battles all over the Ukraine between people who didn't want to be ruled by Nazis and the Nazis. This was one particular famous one, and again, you can look this up on the internet. It's all there. This was a trade union building in Odessa. Protesters against the Nazi government were chased into there, and then they set the place on fire. Anybody that tried to escape was beaten up and thrown back in. Over 100 people died. That's quite famous, okay? There was quite a few atrocities like that. One of them was in the Donbass. Poroshenko sent the army in because they were saying, we don't want anything to do with the Nazis, we want autonomy, okay? We belong to the Ukraine, but we're autonomous. Poroshenko sent the army in to fight them. Some of the army mutinied and deserted, and they formed the Lugansk and the Donetsk People's Republic militias, and they fought against the Ukrainians, okay? Now, they were fighting with nothing. They were fighting with weapons that they stole from the Ukrainian army at first. Russians started to give them stuff later on. They gave them old tanks like T-54 and things like that. But at the start, they didn't. They didn't have any of that. They were just fighting because what was happening to the people in the Donetsk was wrong. Poroshenko then started a campaign of bombing and shelling, particularly school kids. School kids were the main target. This is what he said. Donbass children will sit in cellars being bombed and shelled all day. Ours will go to school. Now remember, this guy they are his people. They are citizens of the Ukraine. Okay, and he's saying, we're going to bomb them and we're going to shell them. 14,000 people were killed. 14,000. How do we know? The UN told us, because the UN did a research on it. 14,000 people were killed, 150,000 were pushed over the border into Russia. Nice. They signed the Minsk agreements. The Minsk Accords, the first one, is supposed to be a ceasefire. And this is Putin turned around and said, look, we've got to have a ceasefire because people are getting slaughtered here. They came up with the Minsk agreement, Minsk 1. Minsk 1 was between Russia and the Ukraine. And basically the Ukraine says, we want you to stop supplying arms to the rebels, and in return for that, we will stop the war. So the Russians stopped supplying the arms, they moved the arms back into Russia, the Ukrainians attacked again. All started up again. But this time, the militias said, we're not having this. And they fought back very, very hard. So much so that they actually caught the Ukrainian army in a pocket. And they were going to annihilate the Ukrainian army. Well, the problem is it was going to ruin the plan. So Merkel flew to Moscow urgently, talked to Putin, said we're going to have a peace plan. Putin was up for it. He's a lawyer, for God's sake. He wanted a peace plan. So they came up with the Minsk II agreement. Complete ceasefire, semi-autonomy for the Donbass, no more firing of shells. Well, that carried on. The reason was NATO wanted to build up the Ukrainian army so that the Ukrainian army could fight Russia, take Russia directly on. Okay? At the time, Merkel, Holland, who was also a signatory, and Poroshenko, who was also a signatory, they were the three main signatories on the Allied side, as it were. They all said, oh, no, this is it. This is a real one. Look what they said about 2 months ago. Every last one of them turned around and said it was a sham. The whole thing was a sham. We did it in order to give Ukraine time to build their arms up. Why? This is why. They want to break up Russia. This was tabled in the UN, by the way, by the Americans. They wanted the UN General Assembly to vote on this, breaking up Russia. Okay? The reason they wanted to break up Russia was no longer a threat to the US. The EU had a different plan. It was exactly the same, break up Russia, but this time it was going to be broken up into lots of different regions. This is from a EU conference, by the way, arranged by the Poles. This time it was going to be broken up into lots of different regions, and each region was going to be run by a different country in the EU. What was it the Polish MEP said? We're going to take control and run it on behalf of the people that live there. Yeah, sure they are, absolutely. Okay, so that's the plan. That was the game plan. That's the end plan. Okay. This plan's been going for 20 odd years, by the way. Okay. I'll come to him in a second. Let me give you a little bit of an overview on Ukraine. The western side of Ukraine is more the high-techy stuff, yeah? They're very good software engineers. I mean, I really like the Ukrainians. They're great people, okay? They really know how to throw a good party. And I really like the Russians. They're great people too. In fact, I can't see any difference between them. You couldn't slide a cigarette paper between the two of them. Western Ukraine was orientated towards Europe. Eastern Ukraine, which included Donbass, was orientated toward Russia. Near the twain shall meet, really. East of Ukraine, there were Russians, effectively. West Ukraine, the Ukrainians. The West Ukrainians really, really wanted to have a deal with the EU. The East Ukrainians didn't care. They were doing all their business with Russia anyway. So that was the genesis of it. The problem is that the Donbass, if they got rid of the Donbass represented over a third of Ukrainian income. It was a big money spinner, the Donbass. They had all the black soil there, they had the steelworks, they had the coal mines, they had the oil, all titanium, lithium, all sorts of stuff. It's all in the Donbass, not in the rest of the country, okay? So that's what the fight was for as far as the Ukrainians are concerned. The Ukrainians wanted the advantages of being in the West, this is West Ukrainians wanted the advantages of being in the West, but at the same time they wanted the wealth that the Donbass created. Well, anyway, about 2018, the Americans are starting to get peed off with Poroshenko. It was getting nowhere in the war, okay? The Russians were no closer to being thrown out of the Donbass, which was the idea. They were going to push them out of the Donbass and take it over. They were no closer to that. So consequently, what they did, they said, we need another president in Ukraine. We have to have another president. Because Poroshenko keeps doing things that we don't want him to do. We want somebody who will do exactly what we want him to do. Okay? That's where this guy comes in. This guy is Igor Kolomoisky. And he's a very, very naughty boy. He ran a bank called Privatbank. Okay, it's the biggest bank in Ukraine. And what he did, he took all the depositors' money and bought assets in Ukraine. For example, he owns the biggest gasoline distributors in Ukraine. He owns the steelworks in Ohio. He owns a television company, the most famous one, the most watched one, called 1+1 in Ukraine. So the idea was he took all the money from the bank, he then declared it bankrupt, and he gave it to the state. So there you go, it's yours. I have no claim on it. The $5 billion that was in shareholders' or in depositors' money disappeared. He had it. Well, the problem is, by handing it over to the state, it meant that the state had to pay that $5 billion, which was what his game was. So he walks away free and clear with $5 billion in his pocket. Very nice. The problem is the state wasn't having it. They said, no, we want our money back. So they kept chasing him. He went to Cyprus, started up a private bank in Cyprus. He was chased out of there, and he went to Israel. He's got 3 citizenships, by the way: Ukraine, Israeli, and Cypriot. Actually, he hasn't got Ukraine. He's been stripped of it by Zelensky, so he's Israeli Cypriot at the moment. What he really, really wanted was somebody who was sympathetic to him and make sure all these problems go away. In other words, he wanted his own president, okay? Somebody he can control. Now, on his television station, there was an incredibly popular television program called Servant of the People. And Servant of the People star was a guy called Zelensky. He played a president that was accidentally elected. It was a comedy. Okay? He's famous, by the way, for his ability to play the piano with his penis. Okay, so that's his claim to fame. He was the perfect man. He was an actor. It was an act. The deal was, you'll get a ton of money if you run the country. Not only did he become in charge of the government, all his production team and the other actors, all these people that appear on television now, they all belong to his production team. They're all actors or producers. Budanov, I think it's Budanov, the guy in charge of the sinister guy in charge of the Ministry of the Interior, he was a producer on this show. This show was incredibly popular. Basically, for 3 years, he was appearing on the television screens in the Ukraine as a bumbling president with a good heart that wanted to get rid of corruption. He got voted in a landslide. Of course he did. Oh, and he also said, yeah, we'll have peace. He got voted in a landslide. Everybody, I've gone over my time. Do you want me to stop? I can give you the link. Okay. I'm going to skip. I'll skip some of this because, and it's not bullshit. I can provide evidence for all of this. You. Oh, thank you. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so he's been duly installed. So let's have a look at some of the benefits he brought to the country. Okay. So what sort of things are going on in the Ukraine now? We've got neo-Nazi children's camps. Okay, that's nice. They're taught to fire guns, fly the swastika, all that sort of stuff. And they managed to get the Americans to pay for it, which I thought was very clever. What else? Oh, this is the church. This is Pesca Lavrov. This is the main cathedral in Kiev. The Zelensky regime arrested effectively the Archbishop there, Metropolitan Kirill, on charges of having Russian literature. The Russian literature were Bibles, okay? They took all of the relics, the gold, the paintings and everything else, they took them out of there for safekeeping. They ended up in auction houses in London and Paris, okay? That's one of them, one of the icons. So, what else have we got? All the land is now owned by American corporations. All this grain on the grain corridor, you know, needed for the Ukrainian economy, it's all owned by Americans. Okay, people like BlackRock, etc., etc. You remember Putin? You remember says up there, look, 150 children have been deported from the Donbass into a camp in Russia. Okay, that led to an indictment in the ICC, the International Criminal Court. A group of journalists went out and found the truth. They actually found these children where they were, and they did a video of it. And there's the URL. You can watch it if you like. They were music students and music colleges. They didn't have any in the Donetsk basin, the Donbass. And so they went to Russia to study. That's what they were. You can believe me or not. However, on the other side, from the Daily Mail. Now, you can believe it or you don't. Basically, Ukrainian women and children are being sex trafficked or trafficked for organs. Okay? This one, by the way, White Angel I know about. Phoenix I've never heard of. White Angel is, this came from a Danish NGO, by the way. The way it works, White Angels go out to the villages, they pick up children. We're going to take it to a place of safety. They take them to orphanages or boarding schools in the West. They're picked up by Western aeroplanes, mainly NATO, taken to places of safety in Europe. One Dutch NGO has turned around and said, they were based in Rotterdam, they said 1,000 children, young teens mainly, were taken to Rotterdam and they've disappeared. They've gone. What happened was they were in their place of safety. The idea was they were going to get, not adopted, but, you know, they're going to live with Western families until the war's over and then we're going to go back. What was happening was people were turning up and saying, I'm their aunt. And they were taken away. Rotterdam's a port. Over 1,000 girls have disappeared. They're a port. They could be anywhere now. They estimate over 100,000 women and children have disappeared. Completely disappeared in Europe. Okay? You want evidence, don't you? You want evidence. Here's one of them. He's just been caught. No, he said he was taking people out of the orphanages. 25 will go out, 23 will come back. Okay? He's not the only one. There's been a spate of cases across Poland of child traffickers, okay, from Ukraine. It's pretty grim stuff. Anyway, let's go on to somebody else. Oh, this was in The Guardian, by the way. This is a new thing that they're doing. You know, you keep hearing things like the Russians have been shelling civilian houses and stuff like that with S-300 missiles. Well, S-300 is air-to-defense missile, so it's ground-to-air. Okay, and it hasn't got the range. It's short range, relatively short range. What's happening, the latest thing, is an oligarch wants a bit of land that happens to have a building on it, like a council house, you know, government housing. They would pay the people who operate the air defense system to shell the house. Once it's damaged, the family's moved out. When they come back, the house is demolished, the land is cleared, the land has been sold to a developer. Now, this is The Guardian. You can believe it or not, okay? The biolabs. This is all true. It's been documented by the Chinese, by the way, by the Chinese, not just the Russians, the Chinese. There's about 22 biolabs in Ukraine. Okay, America's got over 200 biolabs, mainly working on biological weapons around the world. One of them's in Thailand, by the way, in Nakhon Ratchasima. You've got a biolab here. The money behind it was Hunter Biden and George Soros. Funny how they keep popping up, isn't it? The customer, Department of Defense. They were doing weapons. They were working on things like weaponizing anthrax, weaponizing...
All right, sorry everyone, we've run out of time. It was the longest talk we've ever had in a club. Keep your microphone. No, I thought it was fascinating. You know, I love it when people tell me things I've never heard before and I have to make me think and stuff. So please come up and please stand up and take a token of our deep appreciation. And whatever else people want to say, this guy is an excellent public speaker by anybody's standards. And I thought it was very interesting getting past history and stuff as well, going back to the early days.
Rabies, okay, coronaviruses that only targeted Slavs, okay, they only killed Russians. and Ukrainians. Didn't kill anybody else, okay? The most successful one they did was TB. They created drug-resistant TB. They smeared it on banknotes and gave it to children. Why did they give it to children? Because children are very trusting, number one, and number two, they're more likely to stick their fingers in the mouths. There was cases popping up of drug-resistant TB. In fact, in Germany, doctors are absolutely baffled that Ukrainian soldiers are turning up with drug-resistant TB. It all came from the biolabs. Now, these biolabs were not biolabs, you know, they weren't people in white coats. They were officers, okay? There was no security. They were always going missing. They were being dropped. A lot of them escaped, okay? How do we know about the biolabs? How do we know that the biolabs is true? You're probably thinking, no, it's just complete nonsense. Victoria Nuland, remember her? She admitted it in a congressional meeting under questioning from Marco Rubio. She turned around and said, this is right at the beginning of the operation, we are very worried about the biolabs in Ukraine. And Marco Rubio is obviously way out of his lane. He's horrified. And basically she turned around and said, we do not want this material to get into the hands of the Russians. We have to get it out. Well, the Russians sent paratroopers in to secure these biolabs. Okay, now as the researchers were running out the back door with test tubes, the Russians were coming in the front door. Now the Russians didn't get all of the material, they got some. But what they did get was all the paperwork. Now, this paperwork was amazing. One particular thing, the Department of Defense turned around and said that these labs are not up to the standard. Therefore, they allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to bring them up to standard. It never got done. But the thing about this was, they listed the people who actually got that money. 50% of them were Americans, 50% were Ukrainians. The money disappeared in graft, but the Russians have it down cold. Who got the money, how it was transferred, which accounts it went into. Okay, 2016. 2016, people in the deep state were very, very annoyed with Donald Trump. The reason was the Ukraine war was supposed to start in 2017. Everything was ready. The army was ready. Russia was relatively weak, okay? Everything would have gone ahead. Hillary Clinton was all up for it. Everybody knew the score. Donald Trump won the election. Notice, the very first impeachment was about him stopping arms shipments to the Ukraine. Ukraine was big in the deep state. It was the big game in town. Okay, 2019, they knew they were going to get Biden in. Okay, it had to be Biden because Biden was in charge of the Ukraine project. This is confirmed. Obama put him in charge of the Ukraine project, okay? It's there, it's in paper, everybody could see it. They wanted to refine the plan, okay, of how they were going to defeat Russia. So they commissioned a report from the RAND Corporation. RAND Corporation is a military-industrial complex, Quango, an entity, an NGO, okay, but it's paid for by the military-industrial complex. And they produced this particular plan. You can see this, it's on the website, okay? This was released in 2019. Now, the idea behind this is how were they going to defeat Russia? So they were, because they were dealing with politicians, they wanted to make it easy to make the decision. This is some of the things I recommend. Now, these ones, I mean, you can go online and you can read all these things. It's all there, okay? Things like expand energy production. They blew that one. That was the biggie. Trade sanctions. Remember, this is 2019, okay? 2 years, 3 years before the SMO, okay? This was the plan. The plan was the Ukrainian army would attack the Donbass, the Russians would come in and attack the Ukrainian army. They would get beaten by the Ukrainian army because the Ukrainian army was the second biggest army and the best equipped army in NATO, okay? So it was a shoo-in. And at the same time, they would impose trade sanctions on Russia, bring the economy to its knees, the people will revolt, throw Putin out, we can move in, we can break up Russia. That was the game, okay? We know that because it's in the damn report, okay? So don't say I'm lying, because they said so. Okay, so I'm not going to go on anything about the war, particularly at the moment, but a few things around the edges. We got to the stage, and I'm calling Boris the Butcher because he's responsible for about 1 million deaths in this war. Right at the beginning of the war, okay, Putin said, this has got to stop. You cannot join NATO. There's no way you can join NATO, okay? In October, I missed a bit actually. The bit I missed was the US had to get rid of Afghanistan so they can focus on the Ukraine, which is why the bodged pullout from Afghanistan. It was all to do with Ukraine. Everything's to do with Ukraine. In October, Joe Biden turned around and said, Ukraine can join NATO if they want. Zelensky turned around and said, I want. We're making a formal application. Putin sent the tanks in. Now, he didn't send the tanks in to defeat Ukraine. He had about 30,000 men with tanks just outside Kiev. Nowhere near enough to attack Kiev. You'd need about 1 million men to attack Kiev. Okay, it's a big city. It was to let Zelensky know he was damn serious. They had a peace conference in Istanbul. Okay? The Ukrainians and the Russians came to a deal. And the deal was Donbass and Lugansk would stay in the Ukraine. Okay? Crimea would always belong to Russia, de facto, as much as de jure. And they would get rid of the Nazis, and they would become neutral. They can have an army, but it has to be neutral. Okay? That was the deal. Sounds pretty reasonable to me. Ukrainians signed it. Okay, the delegates signed it. The Russians signed it. It went back to the Duma in Russia, went back to the Rada in Ukraine, the parliament, yeah. This was a disaster for the West. The West needed that war. Boris Johnson went over in March 2022, spoke to Zelensky, turned around and basically said to him, we will give you everything you need to carry on with the war. They tore up the peace agreement. They killed, this is Ukrainians, they assassinated the people who made the peace agreement apart from one. Okay? The war was on. Boris Johnson started the actual shooting war. Okay? What happened then? The Ukrainian army pushed towards the Donbass. The Russians rushed round. They didn't bring their army in. I mean, that was one of the things that really got me. People were talking about, oh, you know, the Russian army's there. No, the Russian army weren't there. The Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic militia were there, but not the not the Russian army. The Russian army wasn't get there. What the Russian army did provide them with was a hell of a lot of artillery, okay, and tanks. But actual army, no. At the start of this war, the Russian army was a shambles. It certainly was. It was completely the wrong configuration for this type of war, okay? The Russian army left the field. They pulled back, the whole damn lot of them. The only people that were fighting were the militias and Wagner. What they needed, what the Russians needed, because they didn't have any troops there effectively, was they needed a diversion. They wanted to attack something they knew the Ukrainians were going to want to defend. They chose Bakhmut. The reason they chose Bakhmut is because all the railway lines converge in Bakhmut, and it was a fortress. The Russians wanted to kill as many Ukrainians as they could in one place, using what they were superior at, which was artillery. Okay? The only way they could do that was a pitched battle. Surovikin, General Surovikin, who's in charge of the Ukrainian defences, he decided to send Wagner in. Why did he decide to send Wagner in? Number one, it was available. Okay? Number two, it was full of convicts. Who the hell cares if convicts die? Pretty much that was the thing. You join Wagner, you serve for 6 months. If you survive, you get a pardon. Okay? 85,000 Ukrainian soldiers died in Bakhmut. 40,000 Wagners died in Bakhmut. It was a bloodbath, but it served the purpose. It served the purpose was it took everybody's mind off the fact that there was no Russian army on the field. The Russian army started to trickle back, okay? Surovikin built excellent defences, okay? I'm not going to talk about any more of the army type stuff, okay? I could do, but I'm not going to. Okay. I want to tell you about a few of the other things that are going on. There was a civil war going on in the Sudan. Not of interest to our story. Well, actually it is. This is a Ukrainian plane, a cargo plane. This particular plane makes the trip from Kiev to Khartoum at least once a day. Plus other planes do it the same, okay? It was carrying arms. The arms that are being donated by the Western powers are being sold in Khartoum. Why Khartoum? Khartoum is the biggest arms bazaar in the world. Everybody buys their arms there. Hamas, Boko Haram, ISIS, the Mexican cartels, CIA. When the CIA want dirty arms that don't appear on the books, they buy them there. Okay, so they were having a gun battle. How many of us? It was mainly heavy caliber guns, okay? This plane got hit by a 50 cal. The one next to it got hit by a 50 cal as well. Look what happened to the Ukrainian plane. It blew up. Okay? Full of arms. I'm driving everybody away. Oh, this is a good one. Do you remember when we supplied the Challenger tanks? Britain supplied the Challenger tanks. We supplied them with depleted uranium. And the government at the time says, oh, it's perfectly safe. It's not radioactive, which is actually true, okay? The problem is we used it in Iraq and we used it in Serbia. And since then, since we used these shells, there's been huge amounts of birth defects, etc., etc. The Russians really did not want them firing those shells in their land, because remember, these are going to be used in the new territories. They found out where they were. They were in a place called Klemenitska, okay? Now you can look at this, find this on the internet, because it's if you like war porn and you like things being blown up, this is the one for you, okay? This is a serious explosion. They blew them all up. Then what happened? Well, the problem is that depleted uranium, when it's burned, it becomes extremely toxic, okay? And it gives you cancer if you ingest it. Either you take it in through your lungs or you take it in through food, normally through food. So you get stomach cancers, bowel cancers, etc., etc. Depleted uranium is pretty nasty. What happened? That huge mushroom cloud, which was depleted uranium, drifted over Europe. And guess where it landed? In the UK. Aldermaston suddenly noticed, and this is online as well, you can look it up, huge peaks in the amount of radiation in the UK. It was our depleted uranium coming home. Okay? Our leaders are screwing this war up something cruel. I just thought you might want to know. People have been saying that Putin is deliberately targeting civilians. He's not. They're his people. Why would he target them? So I thought I'd put this graphic up. Now this graphic comes from the UN, by the way, so I believe them. This is about 25 days of Gaza versus 563 days of the Ukraine war. Notice, very few civilian casualties in the Ukraine war. Look how many there is in Gaza. in just over 3 weeks. Puts it in perspective, okay? The bottom line from this war, now you believe me or not, I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can look this stuff up online if you want to. The bottom line from this war is this is going to change the West. The West is going to go into decline from this point on, and it's caused by the war, and there's myriad reasons, okay? But the West is going into decline because of this war, okay? We're seeing huge geopolitical shifts in the world at the moment, away from the West. Africa, South America, Asia are all moving away from the West because of this war, because of what we're doing in this war, because of the cruelty and because of the fact we're backing Nazis and all the rest of it. They really don't like that sort of thing. They're backing away from us, okay? This is going to end very badly for us, for the West, okay? Anyway, incidentally, if anybody's interested about, I mean, the war's lost, by the way. It's completely over. I mean, once Sandrivka falls, which it will fall in the next month or so, that's the war over, pretty much, okay? We got no weapons, we got no money for them. Basically, they're on their own, they're screwed. The only person who believes in the victory is Zelensky, okay? Nobody else, okay? The West are telling him, even the CIA owns Time magazine, yeah? And basically they're telling him in his last story, give it up, Zelensky, it's over. He won't. He signed a decree saying that he cannot negotiate with the Russians. He's put a decree on himself, which is crazy. But he did. Okay? It's all over. The only thing that would save Ukraine, theoretically, is if NATO took over. And this was the NATO plan. NATO was going to take over half of Ukraine. Russia was going to take over the other half of Ukraine. And the Russians are not having that. There's no way that NATO's going to be there, okay? What would happen if NATO did come in on the side of the Ukrainians? They'd lose, and they'd lose very badly, okay? I'll tell you for why. Number one, NATO doctrine is first get air superiority, okay? Number one thing, dominate the air, bomb the hell out of the other lot. Okay, keep doing that until they're weak, then send the armor in. That's NATO doctrine, okay? The problem is Russia's air defenses are the best in the world. Now, who says this? The Pentagon said that Russian air defenses are the best in the world. Ukraine couldn't do it. They lost most of their air force because of Russian air defenses, okay? It would be exactly the same if NATO went in themselves, but that doesn't stop there. NATO hasn't got the troops. Now, that sounds bizarre, doesn't it? This is from the War College of War, US College of War, okay? It's where the senior officers learn senior officering, okay? This is what they said. 50,000 people every 2 weeks. We would lose 50,000 people every 2 weeks we went to war with Russia. Now, put that in context, within 2 months, the US will have lost more troops than they ever lost in the history of the US in this war. We can't do it. The West can't do it. What else did they say? That's how many troops are available. 76,000 troops are available, ready troops. They're the ones who will go straight in. Do you see something wrong there? Every week they're losing 25,000 troops. 3 weeks, they're gone. But there's something even more important. And that is aircraft carriers. The day's over. Hypersonic missiles. One hypersonic missile will take out an aircraft carrier. Russia's got hundreds of hypersonic missiles, which they've used very successfully. In other words, Russia at the beginning of the war could sink the whole of the American fleet. All of them. One fell swoop. Which begs the question, how does America get there? If all the troop ships are sunk, if all the aircraft carriers are sunk, how do they get there? You cannot fly an army and all its heavy equipment in. It needs shipping. You just can't do it. Okay? Notice, by the way, what they're looking for. This is what they're looking for in the future. Conscription. They want to get rid of this is the Army War College now. They want to get rid, in the US, they want to get rid of the volunteer force and they want to bring in conscription. You imagine how well that's going to go down, can't you? Okay, well, the Pentagon's on top of this. They know this is not going to work, okay? They're not going to send. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll use a small nuke, tactical nuke, only a little one, okay? Just blow up the Russian soldiers in Donbass. You know, Russians won't mind. I mean, they're pretty easygoing. You know, one little nuke. Putin turned around and says, you set off one little nuke, we'll destroy America. This was the nuclear threat from Putin. It was retaliation. You do that to us, we'll do that to you, big time. Okay. Now, we've all heard that Russia is a gas station with nukes. Okay. So their nukes are not very good, they're a load of rubbish, obviously. This is their new satellite missile. It's a beast. It's called Samart, means devil. It carries 8 warheads, hypersonic warheads, okay? Each nuclear tipped. Plus it carries its own warhead. It's got its own air defense system, and it's supersonic, okay? Guaranteed to get through. It will fly from Russia to the UK in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes. They did test firings this week. Two test firings. Fired one of them. They fired the seaborne one from a submarine in the Arctic. Yeah, I'm 1 second and I've finished. And they both struck within. They went over 1,000 kilometers. They both struck within a meter or so. The Russian nuclear fleet is ready to roll. What about the West? This is the American one. They tested it last week. It blew up. We're in trouble. If we go to Russia, we're in trouble. Okay? Big trouble. So I suggest we don't do it. Ukraine war's over. It's finished. There's all sorts of nasty things going on, and it really sickens me because, as I said, I've got a lot of friends in the Ukraine, and I really love the Ukraine, and I think it's wicked what we've done to them. That's it, really. Thank you. This was bullshit, that was bullshit, that's fine. I can provide links. I can provide a load of links and send them to the organizer if you want. I mean, all of this is you can verify it, okay? Where are you from? Germany, okay. Oh, so you must be really thrilled about the Nazis, right? No questions? You believe me 100%?
Thank you. Some input from Nordic point of view. So it's necessary to support Ukraine and stop Russia. If not, Russia will continue attacking neighbors. So in Finland we know what does it mean. In 1939 Russia attacked Finland, but it couldn't come. But they 4 days before Russia attacked Finland, they did fake shooting, and they told that Finland attacked Russia. And in that time there was 3 million people in Finland. I don't know how many people in Russia, but there was a lie. And this is a connection with the topic of today. So what is true and what is not? In 1940, Russia attacked it again, but it couldn't come. And if you go to even a small village in Finland, you can find large graveyards of war heroes. Also, Finland lost the geographical parts in north, south, and in mid-Finland.
Which side of the war was Finland fighting on?
Sorry.
Which side of the war was Finland fighting on?
So
you were fighting on the side of the Nazis, yes?
No, this is not.
You were,
this
because
is,
you were
this is
involved
not
in the
true.
siege of Leningrad. It's 100% true.
So this is, if I can explain this, please. So Russia attacked Finland 1939 and 1940. And there was cooperation with Germany, yes, but it was very individual war against Russia. So Finland had a war with Russia, and this lasted 4 years, and I told you what happened after that. So this is a comment, not a question. Yes, but I can also comment, I think. Yeah, okay, but thank you.
I have a number of questions. I'd like to know why Ukraine, it can't be one. How does the Ukraine have a Jewish president?
How?
Yeah, when they're a Nazi country, as you just assumed. Yeah. No, okay, it's just a question we can let go in the air. Okay, it doesn't have to be answered or anything.
No, I can answer it.
Now the laboratories you were talking about, we got them in Thailand. I knew about it 50 years ago. I worked with them. They're all over the world, and it's run by the U.S. Army. Tropical medicine mostly.
Yeah, fine. I'm just saying they got biolabs.
This atomic explosion you were talking about in radiation.
It wasn't an atomic explosion. It was.
Whatever. When they get the radiation from it, the nuclear physicists know exactly what reactor it came from in the world.
I realise. I've read Tom Clancy. Yeah, I know.
There's a lot of other questions. I mean, you're full of brown stuff up to here.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I've lived in Moscow. I've lived in the Ukraine. In fact, I married a Ukrainian lady. We're divorced now. But I'm not disputing what you're saying, but my question is, why, when you say you're for the Ukrainians and equally the same for the Russians, this was all about Ukrainians, not about the Moscow or the Russian atrocities. I've seen them, and believe you me, they're as bad, if not worse, than the Ukrainians which you spelled out today. And that's my question, basically.
Atrocities like what, for example?
Atrocities, babies' deaths, the way they invaded. I've seen all the films on it. Like you can quote YouTube, I can quote, not YouTube, but another. Anyway, I just wondered why you went head on to Ukraine and not talked about the atrocities from the Russians.
The whole point of my talk was...
Use your microphone.
The reason for my talk was about how we're involved. If this is between Russia and Ukraine, fine, let them duke it out, okay? But they're not the only people involved in this, and that's what bothers me. What do they call it? Escalatory ladder, okay? Basically, we are in danger in the West in escalating this, adding nuclear to it and various other things, okay? I want